you've had almost a year to come up with a solution since you didn't run this league when you had the opportunity to do it during this entire period of COVID. Why is this terribly organized? Why is this so rushed? Hello, everybody. Here we are on the eve of the Dota Pro Circuit kicking off, and I'm pretty excited about the matches starting. Just for the sake of, we haven't really had anything official Valve related, anything kind of leading to anything in the Dota world in quite some time. So I'm very curious to see how the Dota Pro Circuit kicks off and how it looks in this very first season of the league system, something that we've never really had in Dota 2. Will the DPC grow the game? Pretty unlikely, in my opinion. Will the DPC sustain the game and allow for good competition and for teams and players to continue to have a job and for talent to have a job? Yeah, definitely it will do some of that. It remains to be seen how big that pool will be of sustainable income for both talent and TOs and players alike. But there's a lot to be learned from this first season, and I just kind of want to give a few thoughts of both the good and the bad of this whole process now that we are about to actually kick off the season. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say about everything down in the comments below. So basically, the good things that I see from the DPC are, number one, regular Dota is going to be back and it seems to have some actual sort of purpose. During COVID and during the whole pandemic period after the majors and minors were canceled, there was a big lull period where there wasn't a whole lot going on. The games were good for these third-party events, but they also didn't really have a true purpose. It was just kind of like teams playing for money and for entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I am a huge fan of the storylines in Dota, and I think that basically that is what really has made this esport unique and entertaining for the vast majority of people who watch it is, watching these teams develop and watching these dark horses come up and make their way to TI and actually perform. So it's nice to actually have some sort of purpose, whether we actually end up in a major, whether we actually get a TI still remains to be seen and is going to have a lot to depend on sort of how governments handle things, which is very kind of scary, I think, for Dota fans. Who knows whether we will actually be able to bring everybody to Stockholm and have a TI. Who knows whether we'll actually be able to send players to other places to have majors on LAN. I really don't know. I don't see it happening in this first season, despite what Valve says. Maybe they'll do a bubble. Who knows? But regardless, we have some sort of purpose behind the games, which is nice. I also do like that there is some sort of structure to force teams to play regularly, to force them to show off for potential sponsors. It gives the bigger market teams an obligation basically to show up on a regular basis. And, teams like Evil Geniuses and Secret and, the big market teams for each particular region are very important to the health of that region and for fans to be able to tune in regularly and stay interested in them. And at the same time, when these big market teams are playing the smaller market teams, let's say you have Evil Geniuses playing against, the seventh qualifying stack in NA, that qualifying stack will get extra exposure that they would never get otherwise. I don't know whether these seasons will continue to be as short as this first one is going to be. I mean, this first season is like 6 weeks, right? Something like that. So for 6 weeks of work as a lower division team, you're still going to be making, a few $1,000s per player. Which is pretty, it's okay. I mean, unless you're on the lower end of the spectrum, in which case you're making, maybe like a few $100s per player after taxes and all that, which is not great in terms of monthly salary. But then you also have to argue, do these players deserve to be paid to play the game? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't think that everybody should be paid to play Dota. But if they are providing entertainment for a well-established league, I think that probably they should be compensated for their time, but maybe not necessarily as a fully professional, I can do this full-time player. If you are, in that very low end of the lower divisions, it is sort of still an amateur pursuit at that point. So I think that that's okay, but is definitely something that we should keep an eye on. Um, and at the same time, the teams in the upper echelon are going to be making a lot less money than they would probably like to be making for a month of their time. But they also are being rewarded most likely by going to these majors, which have the actual real money as prize pool. Although, if I remember correctly, the major structure is also a little bit less beneficial for teams that go. Like they don't make as much money as they would have in the past. Um, and so, just in general, the money situation is going to be something that we want to keep an eye on. We have to keep the players interested in playing the game, which means that there has to be some reward to playing the game and putting their time and effort in. But we also want to make sure that it's more spread out so that there is more opportunity for people to play and pursue the idea of being a professional Dota player. And I also like, because there are different TOs running the different leagues, you get to see some sort of comparison made between each of the TOs. You know, if one is showing up big time with big production value, they're putting a ton of effort in, obviously everything's running smoothly, it's really good to watch them, and another one is not, that's going to show up. And I think that that's very important. We don't just let people off the hook. You know, if one of the TOs is obviously putting way less budget, way less effort into a broadcast, and maybe the talent is not as good, and that kind of stuff, that should be something that is discussed, and it should force all of the TOs to try and outdo each other to some extent. Which actually brings us to the bad section of things that I wanted to talk about. The first of which is, why did this take so long to do? Um, we had COVID. It was shutting everything down. Everything had to go online. And we'd already had the DPC announced as something that was going to happen. So there was already sort of a minor structure in place. People were already kind of talking. I'm sure the TOs and Valve were already talking and negotiating. Why did it take almost a year to bring about this DPC? And I don't know. I would assume that some of it has to do with laziness. And I'm just going to be blunt. I think that it was pretty lazy that they didn't push for this while, these other esports were figuring out how to do bubbles for their world tournaments and world championships. As long as it took, the fact that it was so uncoordinated and ugly and just terribly messy when the qualifiers and everything were announced is also a fairly unforgivable mistake. And the second bad point that I wanted to point out, I have been coaching a EU team, a couple different versions of an EU team over the last few months. So I was involved in the open qualifiers, and frankly, it was a complete mess. Like, we were scrimming, we were playing for these other little third-party tournaments, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, they're like, by the way, you're qualifying for the league in 2 days. And so that was pretty brutal, because my team in particular, we had a player who was in the process of moving, and so we had to play with a stand-in during the entire qualifiers because there was just no warning. It was like, all of a sudden, you're now qualifying for this league, which is going to determine your entire future in professional Dota for the next few months and potentially for forever. Let's be honest. The teams that supposedly the DPC is kind of meant to help, these lower tier teams, the tier 2, tier 3, the players that are trying to develop as pros, were the ones that were screwed over the most by this entire situation, because they are the ones that probably have other jobs or have school or not playing Dota full time and have to actually coordinate with themselves and with their teammates showing up for these events. And so it was just not a good situation. And then, of course, if you actually look at the qualifiers, it was all over the place, right? We had direct invites based on basically brand value alone. If you look at some of the teams in SEA, there was a Mushi stack. I mean, let's be honest, as much as Mushi has done for the game in that region, the player has not been relevant in years. And yet he gets a direct invite versus other teams not. And it's just like, what is this? We had upper division teams or teams that are guaranteed to be in the league with players that are just not performing and haven't been performing in a while. But because they were relevant 5 years ago, they have a direct invite to the league, while some of these other teams and other players don't have that opportunity and have to go through opens. And then by going through opens, can only qualify for the lower division. Um, Looking at C, for example, we have a situation where 23 Savage, one of the best carries in the Southeast Asian region, had been moving to VG Gaming, now actually can't go to China and can't play on the team, so gets dropped right before the season starts, which means he has no time to join any other team. And that means that even if he were to throw together a stack, they would have no practice, very little chance of actually qualifying. And I don't even think he was even able to try to qualify for even the lower division. And so he's going to miss the entire first season of the DPC as one of the best players in the region. Not only that, but if you miss the first season of the DPC, you have almost no chance of making it to TI because, right, the first season is going to allow you to qualify for the majors, which is going to allow you to earn points, which is then going to allow you to potentially make TI. But if you are a lower division team or a lower division player, you get zero chance to earn DPC points. And there's an even better example in the lower division of the SCA region, which is this team called Hoyo, Hoyo, which is made up of very, very talented players, some of which were on the team Motivate Trust, which was arguably the best team in the region over the last 4 months of play in these online cups and tournaments. I don't know if they were necessarily better than TNC, but they were certainly winning and doing extremely well. And they had a couple players poached. The team kind of fell apart. But Team Hoyo is a team that you would expect to be competitive in the upper division of SCA, but they're stuck in the lower division because they had this roster change right before the whole situation of qualifying came about. And so now they're stuck in the lower division and they have no opportunity to play for DPC or even try to qualify for TI, most likely. And by the time they actually get to the upper division, it might be too late for them, even if they were potentially a team that could be in the top 3 or top 4 of the region. So it's kind of a mess. The fact that there was no path from opens to the upper division, except for I think in the North American region, was just bad in my opinion. There should, especially because of how quickly this came on, how very little time the teams had to react. There should have been some opportunity for these for these open qualifier teams to make upper division, and it was just very messy. It left a bad taste in my mouth. Both as a coach and just kind of as a fan of the game. I was like, why? Why is this so convoluted and unclear and so rushed feeling when you've had almost a year? You've had almost a year to come up with the solution since you didn't run this league when you had the opportunity to do it during this entire period of COVID. Why is this terribly organized? Why is this so rushed? So I do hope that this whole monetary structure ends up being a little bit more beneficial. It still remains to be seen how this all shakes out. And another point is that we might end up with too much Dota. I can remember when the first sort of major minor Valve, the Valve major minor system came out, where we had like what 20 minors or something like that, and 15 majors. That season, there was so much Dota that it was very, very hard not to get burnt out as a fan, and I'm sure as a player, and definitely as talent. There was so much to cover, and frankly, it just became very hard to care about a lot of these tournaments. Even the majors started to kind of feel a little bit lackluster, especially based on, production value of some of them not being as good as others. But certainly the minors, I know that a lot of people just didn't watch them because why? The minors were the teams that you didn't care about as much. They were for less money. They didn't really matter. You'd already seen 12 of them, so why watch another one? And I do have some fear that the lower division will kind of end up being sort of this Dota that nobody really cares about, which is definitely not good for these teams that are trying to, maybe court sponsors or find some sort of real professional environment to work in. Perhaps one of the bigger issues with all of this very, very kind of exhaustive schedule of Dota is that there's also almost no room for third-party events. And this is definitely an area that I know a lot of people will be kind of salty about because we have TOs like Epicenter and WePlay who are kind of left out to dry. You know, are the teams really going to want to play a WePlay event right after grinding an entire season? Will there be room for these TOs to run anything with the majors happening after the leagues? I mean, there's sort of like a month break period, but I think it will potentially be pretty detrimental to the third party TO scene, which is actually kind of thriving during this period of emptiness of Valve events. And so we, might be kind of sending a message to third party tournament organizers that were considering getting involved, right? We had one Esports, which is a very, very large Singaporean um, event organizer that was getting involved in Dota. Suddenly, will they want to try again at this point? It's hard to say. I would imagine that the TOs that are actually running the leagues negotiated with Valve, and part of their whole thing, because everybody knows that running Dota events and probably these leagues is not really good for a TO in a business sense. Most of these tournament organizers lose money running these tournaments, and I would assume the leagues probably as well. And as a result, they probably told Valve, hey, we'll run your stuff for you, but you have to schedule in a way that does not allow us to be competed with at all. And so, hopefully, hopefully that doesn't end up coming back to bite the system, but it definitely could. It's going to take the first two seasons. This first season will probably be a mess, quite frankly. If the qualifying situation was any indication of that, I would imagine it will probably be similar in the actual leagues, although hopefully a bit more organized. I definitely think that the first season will be a learning experience. The second season needs to be good because otherwise, I would think it's pretty safe to say that, with maybe cutting out all these third party organizers who were interested, um, if the lower division games are just a complete waste of time, if there isn't enough sort of good Dota being played because the good teams in each region are only playing, once every other week or whatever for us to see, we have to actually get some value for everybody in the scene to care. And so I think that that is very important that we do give it two seasons, but that the second season in particular has to be very good and very intriguing. But I definitely hope that everything kind of evolves quickly and smoothly to a point where the DPC is something that we can actually care about because, at the end of the day, that is what everybody who's a fan of the game hopes for. Like I said, thank you for watching. These are my thoughts. Let me know what yours are down below. And we'll see you in some more content here pretty soon.